The night we decided to end our marriage, the fire alarm went off because I burned the pasta. It felt like a joke the universe was telling us, something small and stupid to mark the moment our lives cracked open. We stood in the kitchen with the windows wide open, smoke crawling out into the cold air, neither of us rushing to fix it. She laughed first. I didn't. That was when I knew this conversation wasn't going to be loud. We had been together 11 years, married for 7. No cheating. No shouting matches that ended with doors slamming. No dramatic betrayal that would make this easier to explain to strangers. Just a slow erosion that neither of us wanted to name. I turned off the stove and sat at the table, watching her wave a dish towel at the smoke like she was trying to chase away a ghost. "We should talk," she said, still standing. I nodded. I had been waiting for those words for months. Her name is Mara. She always preferred honesty over comfort, even when it hurt. That night, her voice was calm, almost professional, like she was explaining a problem at work. She said she didn't feel lonely with me, but she felt absent, like she was living a life next to her own. I told her I felt the same, and the relief in her eyes scared me more than anger ever could. We listed the reasons the way people list groceries: different schedules, different goals, different silences. She wanted to move closer to her sister and start trying for a baby. I wanted to stay and take a promotion that would chain me to my office for the next 5 years. Neither of us had changed suddenly. We had just grown in directions that no longer overlapped. I expected tears. Instead, we drank the burned pasta water with lemon because the kettle was empty and talked about practical things. Who would take the couch? What we would tell our parents? How long we could afford to keep the apartment together? At some point, she reached across the table and touched my hand. It wasn't romantic. It was careful, like she was checking if something still existed. "I don't hate you," she said. "That's the problem." I understood what she meant. Hate would have given us a shape to push against. Without it, everything felt like fog. We slept in the same bed that night, backs turned but close enough to feel each other breathe. I stayed awake, listening to the pipes knock in the walls, remembering all the versions of us that had lived in that room. The student version who ate noodles on the floor. The newly married version who taped pictures above the headboard. The tired version who fell asleep to different shows on different screens. In the morning, she made coffee and left it on the counter for me. No note, no drama, just coffee. I went to work like nothing had happened, which felt like lying with my whole body. When my boss asked if I could take on another project, I said yes without thinking. I needed something solid to hold. Over the next weeks, we moved around each other like polite strangers. We didn't fight over boxes. We didn't divide things like enemies. She took her books and plants. I kept the desk and the old record player that never worked right. When we found something that belonged to both of us, we asked, "Do you want this?" and meant it. One evening, while packing the hallway closet, we found the shoes she wore on our first trip together. They were ruined from rain and still smelled faintly of the sea. She held them for a long time. "You remember how lost we were?" she asked. "We argued about the map for an hour," I said. "And then we found that tiny bar," she added, smiling. We stood there with the shoes between us, not touching, but sharing the same memory. It felt like proof that what we had was real, even if it was over. Friends started asking questions. We told them the truth, and they didn't believe us. They wanted a villain. They wanted a reason that could fit into a sentence. "So what happened?" they asked. We said, "Nothing dramatic," and watched their faces tighten with disappointment. The day she moved out, it rained. Not a storm, just a steady gray fall. I carried her last suitcase to the car. She looked smaller standing there, like someone who had stepped out of a photograph. "I'll change my address tomorrow." "I'll change my address tomorrow," she said, like she was talking about the weather. I nodded and closed the trunk for her. There was a moment where we both stood there, hands in our pockets, not knowing what to do with them. Then she hugged me. Not the kind of hug people give when they want to stay, but the kind you give when you want the other person to be okay without you. When she drove away, the street felt wider than it ever had. I went back into the apartment and noticed how loud it was without her. The fridge hummed. The rain tapped against the window. Her side of the closet looked like a mistake someone had erased. The first week alone felt like walking through a house after a fire. Everything was still there, but it meant something else. I cooked too much food and ate it standing up. I kept the TV on even when I wasn't watching. At night, I lay in the middle of the bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for a sadness that didn't arrive the way movies promised. Instead, there was a steady pressure in my chest, like I had forgotten something important but couldn't remember what it was. Mara called 3 days later, not to check in, but to ask if I had seen her blue scarf. I found it behind the washing machine and held it while we talked. It smelled like her shampoo. Do you want me to drop it off? I asked. There was a pause. Maybe just leave it with the neighbor, she said. I understood. We were practicing distance like a new language. Work filled the hours. I stayed late and learned everyone's coffee order. My boss praised me for being focused, and I didn't correct him. Focus was easier than reflection. Still, I caught myself almost texting her about small things, the stray cat near the office, a song on the radio that she loved. I never sent them. One night, I found a photo frame I hadn't packed. It was from our wedding, both of us squinting in the sun, her hair caught in the wind. I set it face down in a drawer and closed it too hard. A month passed. We met to sign the final paperwork in a quiet office that smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. The woman behind the desk spoke gently, as if we were already fragile. We sat side by side and filled in our names, careful not to brush elbows. Outside, Mara looked at me and smiled in a way that used to mean she was nervous. So, she said, this is official. Yeah, I said. We walked a block together before stopping. There was nothing left to exchange. No keys. No last words. She asked about my job. I asked about her sister. We talked like two people who had once shared a language and were afraid of misusing it now. I hope you get what you want, she said. I hope you do too. She walked toward the bus stop. I watched her until she disappeared into a crowd that didn't know her the way I did. Life didn't break apart after that. It rearranged itself. I started running in the mornings because the apartment felt too quiet at dawn. I learned how to make meals for one without leftovers. Friends invited me out more, like they were afraid I would vanish if they didn't keep an eye on me. I laughed more than I expected. Sometimes, though, I saw her everywhere. In a woman crossing the street with the same walk. In a laugh from another table. Once, I turned too fast in a bookstore because I thought I heard her voice. It wasn't her. It was someone younger, louder, already in love with someone else. Mara sent me a message on my birthday. Just 2 sentences. She said she hoped I was doing well and that she had started volunteering at a shelter. I replied that I was glad. We didn't continue the conversation. I realized then that what we were doing was harder than staying friends and easier than pretending we had never existed. We were carrying something fragile between us and choosing not to drop it. Late one evening, I found myself walking past the old cafe where we used to meet after work. The chairs were stacked outside, the windows dark. I stood there longer than I meant to, thinking about all the talks we had inside, about trips we never took, about names for children we would never have. For the first time, I didn't feel angry or cheated. I felt grateful and empty in the same breath. We hadn't failed. We had reached the end of a version of ourselves and stopped before we turned into people who resented each other for it. That was the hardest truth to accept, that love could end without a crime. 3 months after the separation, I ran into her by accident. I was in the produce aisle, trying to decide if buying 2 apples was optimistic or just stupid when I heard my name. Not shouted, not whispered, just said the way she used to say it when she wanted my attention without making a scene. She looked different in small ways. Shorter hair, a jacket I had never seen before, the same eyes that always seemed to notice details I missed. We stood there with a row of oranges between us like a border. Hi, she said. Hi. We both smiled too fast, then stopped. She told me she was living near her sister now. I told her I had learned to cook lentil soup without burning it. These were the facts we could safely exchange. I noticed she still folded her hands together when she was nervous. We walked to the checkout together, not because we planned it, but because neither of us stepped away. Outside, the air smelled like rain. Cars passed, people hurried, and the world continued like it didn't care about our timing. Do you want to get coffee? She asked. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I did. We sat at a small table by the window. The place was loud enough that silence didn't feel heavy. She told me about the shelter, about a dog that refused to walk unless someone sang to it. I laughed and then felt strange for laughing with her again, like I was borrowing something I had already returned. She asked about work. I said the promotion had gone through. She nodded and said she wasn't surprised. For a second, I saw pride in her face, and it almost hurt more than sadness. When we stood up to leave, there was no argument about who would pay. I reached for my wallet. She reached for hers. We both stopped and let the moment pass. Take care of yourself, she said. You too. We didn't hug this time. We just walked in different directions. That night, I dreamed we were back in the old apartment, but all the furniture was gone. We sat on the floor and talked until the sun came up, like we used to when we were young and poor and thought time was endless. I woke up with the taste of coffee in my mouth and nothing on the table. After that, the memories came differently, not as attacks, but as visitors. A song would remind me of her laugh. A certain street would recall the way she held my arm when crossing. I let the thoughts stay and then leave. It felt like practicing a kind of respect for her and for what we had been. My mother asked if there was a chance we would get back together. I told her the truth, that there was love, but it was shaped like something finished. She didn't like that answer. She said people didn't walk away from good things without a reason. I said sometimes the reason was that the good thing belonged to an earlier version of you. I started seeing someone new in the most unromantic way possible. Her name was Lila, and she worked in the same building. We shared an elevator for weeks before we spoke. She asked if the weather made me tired too. I said yes. That was enough to begin. With Lila, there was no rush. We went to cheap movies and sat in the back. We talked about families, about how both of us had learned to live alone. I told her I had been married. She didn't ask for details, only said she was sorry. I realized how rare that was. Someone who didn't need the story to be dramatic to take it seriously. One afternoon, Mara messaged me again. She said she had found a box of photos and wondered if I wanted any of them. We met in a park and opened it on a bench. There we were, younger and louder, posing in places that now looked unreal. We divided them without discussion. She took the ones with her parents. I took the ones from our first apartment. Do you regret it? She asked suddenly. I thought about it. About the burned pasta. About the way we had chosen calm instead of cruelty. No, I said. Do you? She shook her head. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I think we saved something by stopping, she said. When we said goodbye, it felt final in a new way. Not closed, but settled. I walked home with the photos in my bag and a strange lightness in my chest. I understood then that what we had done was not a failure of love, but an act of it. We had refused to let time turn us into people who blamed each other for growing. Some endings are loud. Ours was quiet, and that made it harder to explain and easier to carry. I didn't tell anyone about Mara's engagement at first. Not because it was a secret, but because it felt like something I needed to carry alone for a while. News like that doesn't hurt the way a wound does. It presses instead, slow and deep, until you understand what it means. I tried to imagine her wedding. Not the details, just the feeling. Her walking towards someone else. Her laughing in a dress I would never see. The thought didn't break me. It rearranged something. I realized that the life I once pictured with her was now officially a story that would never be written. A week later, I went to visit my father. He had started fixing old radios as a hobby, even though he barely listened to them. We sat in his kitchen while one of them hummed on the table between us, open like a patient. You look tired, he said. I think I'm just thinking too much, I replied. He nodded, like that was a diagnosis he understood. My parents had stayed together for decades, not because they were always happy, but because leaving had never felt like an option. I wondered sometimes what would have happened if they had allowed themselves an ending. Your mother and I almost split once, he said suddenly. I looked at him, surprised. Before you were born, he added. We were young and angry. Stayed together out of fear more than love for a while. Do you regret it? I asked. He considered the question seriously. I regret the years we spent being cruel instead of honest, he said. Not the staying, just the way we stayed. On the train home, I thought about that. About how Mara and I had chosen honesty over endurance. About how different that choice might look from the outside. Mara sent me a picture a few days later. Just a ring on her finger, nothing else. No faces. No background. I stared at it longer than I should have. I wrote back, it looks like it fits you. She replied, I hope it does. That was all. Life didn't pause for this. My job kept demanding things. My sister kept calling about small family dramas. I met new people, went on dates that didn't turn into anything. Sometimes I felt too practiced at starting and stopping, like I knew the signs too well to pretend they weren't there. One evening, I ran into Lila by chance. She was waiting for a train with a suitcase and a tired smile. Still here? She asked. For now, I said. You? Leaving again? She replied. Short trip. We talked about nothing important. The train arrived. She hugged me and said, "You always seem like you're in between things." "So do you," I said. She laughed. Maybe that's why we worked. As she disappeared into the crowd, I wondered if some people were meant to live in the spaces between beginnings and endings. Mara invited me to the wedding. The message was careful, respectful. She said she would understand if I didn't come. I read it 3 times and didn't answer for a day. I imagined sitting in a room full of people who knew her now, not as my wife, but as someone else's. I imagined the way she would look at him. I also imagined not going, and how that would turn the memory of us into something unfinished. I told her I would come. The ceremony was small. I sat near the back, unnoticed. She wore something simple. He held her hand like he was afraid to drop it. When she saw me, her eyes widened for a second, then softened. She smiled. Not a private smile. A public one. A thank you. During the vows, I felt the old ache return, but it was different this time. It wasn't about loss. It was about distance, like standing on a shore and watching a ship leave that had never been yours to board. After, we spoke briefly. She introduced me as an old friend. The word felt right. "I'm glad you came," she said. "So am I answered. When I left, I walked for a long time. The city was loud, careless, alive. I felt strangely light, like I had closed a door I didn't know was still open. Some love stories don't end with a fight. They end with people choosing not to become enemies. That choice doesn't make the pain smaller. It makes it cleaner. Time did what it always does. It moved forward without asking permission. The seasons changed, and my life learned a new shape. Lila and I became something that didn't need a label at first. We cooked together on Sundays and argued gently about music in the car. She was curious about my past in a careful way, like someone touching a scar without pressing it. I told her about Mara one evening when the power went out and we were sitting on the floor with candles. I didn't make it sound noble or tragic. I just said we had loved each other and then let each other go. Lila listened. Her knees pulled to her chest. "That sounds adult," she said. "It didn't feel like it at the time," I replied. With Lila, I noticed how different love could be when it wasn't built on the same old habits. She didn't know the shortcuts to my moods. She didn't finish my sentences. Sometimes that felt lonely. Sometimes it felt like space. Mara didn't disappear from my life completely, but she faded into the background like a song you stop playing every day. Months would pass without a word. When she did write, it was brief. Updates, not confessions. I learned not to reread her messages too many times. One afternoon, my sister called and said Mara's sister had had a baby. I didn't know how to feel about that information, but it stayed with me all day. I imagined Mara holding the child, the way she used to hold our friend's newborn with a look that was half wonder, half fear. I wondered if she still wanted the things she once told me she did. A week later, she surprised me with an invitation to her sister's housewarming party. It felt strange to be included in a life that was no longer mine. I asked Lila what she thought. "Do you want to go?" she asked. "I don't know." "Then you should figure out if it's about curiosity or unfinished business." I didn't go. I sent Mara a message wishing her sister well and said I had plans. It wasn't a lie. I just didn't say the plan was to protect something fragile. That decision taught me something about boundaries. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet ones you build by choosing what not to step back into. Lila and I lasted almost a year. Long enough to know each other's routines. Long enough to see the cracks. She wanted to move abroad for work. I didn't. This time, the difference felt familiar, like a pattern I had already studied. We talked about it in a cafe and reached the end without raising our voices. "You don't look surprised," she said. "I think I learned how to recognize endings," I said. She smiled sadly. "That's not always a good skill." After Lila, I was alone again, but not in the way I had been after Mara. That first loneliness had been full of her shape. This one was just empty space. I filled it with running, with books, with dinners that didn't wait for anyone. On the anniversary of the day Mara moved out, I found myself standing on the same street. I hadn't planned it. My feet just took me there. The building looked the same. New curtains in the window. Different plants on the balcony. I didn't knock. I didn't go inside. I just stood there and tried to remember who I had been when I lived there. Not the husband. Not the man who left. Just the person who thought love was something you could hold in place if you tried hard enough. Later that week, Mara called. Not a message. A call. Her voice sounded older, or maybe mine did. "I heard about you and Lila," she said. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," I said. It was the right time. We talked about neutral things at first. Work, weather, the way people do when they're afraid of the deeper parts. I'm engaged, she said suddenly. The word landed between us and stayed there. I wanted you to hear it from me, she added. I congratulated her. I meant it. The feeling surprised me. There was a brief ache, but it passed like a wave that doesn't pull you under. He's kind, she said. That's the main thing. I'm glad, I replied. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet apartment and thought about how strange it was to be part of someone's history and not their future. There was sadness in that. There was also relief. We had chosen a clean ending. No scars shaped like insults. No children carrying questions we couldn't answer. Just two people who had stopped before the damage started. That night, I took out the old photos and looked at them without flinching. I saw happiness, not a mistake. After the wedding, something in me settled. Not in a way that erased the past, but in a way that gave it a place to sit without demanding attention. I stopped expecting memories to ambush me. They still appeared, but like postcards instead of alarms. I started noticing the shape of my days again. Morning light through the kitchen window. The smell of coffee. The way the city sounded before it fully woke up. I realized how much of my life with Mara had been about planning. Next year, next step, next version of us. Now, my future felt smaller, but clearer. It was measured in weeks, not decades. I met a woman named Ingrid at a friend's birthday party. She was visiting from another city and had the kind of calm voice that made people lean in. We talked about books and trains and the strange comfort of unfamiliar places. When she asked if I had ever been married, I said yes. When she asked why it ended, I said, we grew in different directions. She nodded like that made sense. We saw each other a few times while she was in town. Walks by the river. Long dinners where the food went cold because we forgot about it. There was an ease to it, but also a limit. She was leaving. I wasn't going with her. On her last night, she said, you seem like someone who doesn't rush anymore. I used to, I replied. It didn't work out. She smiled and said, maybe it worked out in a way you can't see yet. After she left, we didn't promise anything. We sent messages for a while and then less often. It ended the way it began, quietly. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt practiced. One afternoon, I found a box in the back of a closet I had forgotten about. Inside were letters Mara had written me before we lived together. Real letters. Paper. Ink. I sat on the floor and read them slowly. They were full of plans and certainty. The person who wrote them believed in a future like it was a fixed address. I didn't feel foolish reading them. I felt tender toward that version of her. Toward that version of me. I thought about writing to her, telling her I had found them. I didn't. Some things belonged to the time they were made in. My mother asked again if I was seeing anyone. I said not seriously. She said she worried I would end up alone. I told her I worried more about ending up in something that needed a reason to stay. She didn't like that answer either. Winter came early that year. The streets filled with salt and gray slush. On one of those cold evenings, I ran into Mara's husband by accident. He was standing outside a bakery, holding a bag with her name written on it in neat marker. He recognized me from the wedding. Hi, he said, unsure. Hi, I replied. We talked for a minute about nothing important. Weather, lines, the smell of bread. Then he said, she talks about you sometimes. With respect. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said, she was always honest. He nodded. That's what I like most about her. When I walked away, I felt something loosen. Not jealousy, not pride, just relief. She was loved in a way I no longer needed to provide. Later that night, I dreamed of the old apartment again. This time, the rooms were empty, but clean. Sunlight came in through the windows. I walked through it without stopping, like it was a place I no longer had to search for anything. I woke up with the sense that the story I had been telling myself was changing. It wasn't about losing her. It was about what we had refused to do, refused to turn our care into resentment. We had chosen an ending that didn't poison what came before it. That choice didn't make us heroes. It made us careful, and careful, I was learning, could be a kind of courage. The years after that did not feel like recovery. They felt like continuation. My life did not restart from zero. It simply stopped orbiting one person and learned a wider path. I changed apartments. I changed jobs again, not out of ambition this time, but because I wanted windows in my office and less noise in my head. I learned which parts of myself were shaped by marriage and which had always been there, waiting. Mara and I did not become friends in the casual sense. We became something quieter. We sent messages on birthdays, sometimes on holidays, never late at night, never when something inside us was breaking. We did not lean on each other. We did not pretend we were strangers. We kept the distance that meant respect. One spring morning, she wrote to tell me she was pregnant. The message was simple. No explanations. No fear between the lines. Just news. I put my phone down and sat in the kitchen with the window open. A bird was shouting somewhere outside like it was angry at the sky. I felt a strange mix of emotions that did not cancel each other out. Happiness for her. A brief echo of what might have been. And then, something steady. Acceptance. I wrote back, "I'm glad for you." And I was. That afternoon, I went for a long walk without direction. I passed playgrounds and cafes, and people who were arguing softly about nothing important. I thought about how close Mara and I had once been to building a life that would have looked similar to theirs. I also thought about how easily that life could have turned into a place of quiet bitterness if we had stayed out of fear instead of truth. There was a version of us that could have survived. There was also a version that would have grown sharp and small. We had chosen not to meet that version. That choice kept showing itself in small ways. In how I spoke about her without anger. In how she spoke about me without blame. In how neither of us needed to rewrite the past to justify the present. I met someone again, later. Her name was Nora. She taught history and believed silence was something to share, not fill. We did not rush. We did not make promises we had not tested. When I told her about Mara, about the marriage that ended without betrayal, she listened and said, "That sounds like two people who didn't want to hurt each other just to prove they were hurt." With Nora, love felt different. Not louder, clearer. It did not need to compete with an old story because that story had a clean ending. I did not compare them. I did not look backward when I touched her hand. One evening, while sorting through old documents, I found the paper where Mara and I had divided our things. It was written in her neat handwriting, with little notes in the margins. "You keep the desk. I'll take the books. Decide later about the lamp." I realized how rare that page was. Not a contract born from anger, but from care. Evidence that two people could stop without trying to win. I thought about what people usually want from breakups: a reason, a wound, a villain. We had given them none of that. We had given them something harder to accept, an ending that did not explain itself with pain. When people asked me now what happened, I said, "We loved each other. Then we didn't fit anymore. So we let go." Some nodded. Some looked unsatisfied. That was fine. There are stories that need fire to make sense. Ours needed quiet. I sometimes imagine an alternate life where we stayed. I see arguments that would have started small and ended with doors closed too hard. I see words used as weapons instead of bridges. I see two people keeping score instead of memory. Then I imagine the life we chose instead, separate paths, no war between them. Letting go without hate did not mean letting go without pain. It meant refusing to turn pain into a reason to destroy what had once been good. It meant carrying the past without dragging it into the future like a threat. If I learned anything from loving Mara, it was this. Not every ending needs to be a disaster to be final. Some endings are an agreement between two people who know they cannot become who they need to be together. We did not save the marriage. We saved the truth of it. And that, in the end, was the last thing we did for each other.